So, as we said, this is the story of the creation of everybody. And let's watch, how does everybody's creation begin?
In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and the earth was void and emptiness, and there was darkness on the face of the abyss. And the Spirit of God was constantly moving on the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God made a distinction between light and darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
Probably heard that before, and you may be wondering, what are those highlighted segments? And we're going to get to that in a second. Swedenborg actually gives the inner meaning of all of these, every word, every phrase in it. We're just going to jump to some important ones to give you a sense of what is the creation story about and how is it relevant and what is this inner meaning. So this first day of creation is about the beginning of our spiritual life. This day is when we go from initially being absorbed in ego concerns and materialism to realizing that there is something else and something higher. So how is this about it? You look at the literal sense, it seems to be talking about physics and light. How is that about a person? So let's break it down phrase by phrase and look for what Swedenborg was talking about. Let's begin with the very beginning. In the beginning, that phrase. So this is, Swedenborg is positing, this whole discussion about evolution versus creationism. In the United States, in the schools, you have people fighting which should be taught. That all came about because people look at this and they say, this is a description of how the world was created, and that it takes 7 days, really just 6 days. So if anybody's saying that it's billions of years old and there was a different process, then they're declaring war on God. So there's this whole mess. But Swedenborg is saying this is not about the physical creation of the universe. This is about the creation of our spiritual lives. And in the beginning is the beginning of each of our lives, but not our lives in the sense of when we were born physically, but the beginning of our spiritual lives. Swedenborg said that what we would call good, loving other people, thinking about others, accepting things from the divine, that spiritual life, and being closed up and self-centered, vengeful, hateful, what we would call egocentric, that is spiritually dead. So initially we're all kind of born completely thinking about ourselves. We go through our teenage years and start to get into young adulthood. There's sort of this light that can start to go on, at different times for different people's lives. Hey, there are other people out there. There are other things that matters. And that's when the creation story begins. So in the beginning is when we first begin to receive spiritual life, or the life of the mind and the heart. So let's take a look at the face of the abyss. This comes up just afterwards, saying there was darkness on the face of the abyss. And the face of the abyss, that's us, man. That the dark water, you can picture it, and we're going to help you by giving you an image. That is like a human mind when there's just a mass of ego, negative, Swedenborg would call them hellish things. We're worried about reputation. We don't like it when someone upsets us. We want things our way. We want creature comforts over the needs of others. And we're also mistaken about the ultimate reality of things. It's just like a big mass of dark water, and that's the face of the abyss. Swedenborg describes it this way in Secrets of Heaven 18. The face of the abyss means our cravings and the falsities these give rise to. We are wholly made up of cravings and falsities and wholly surrounded by them. Because no ray of light is in us, we are like an abyss or something disorganized and dim. And I want to say, this is not the language you could say he's just pulling this out of nowhere. He's going, water happens to symbolize the things in our minds in this instance. But it's a self-consistent system. Water is always having to do with intellectual things, truth or falsity, depending on its particular context. So all these things, we're just giving you an introduction to them, but they all link together. And within the text of the Old and New Testaments, as Swedenborg describes them, they're consistent in their meaning. So there's a whole language that we're learning. You have to take my word for it, or go check out his books further where he gives all these cross-references and all that. So we're the abyss, and as you probably have heard before, to the abyss, God speaks some very famous words. He says, "Let there be light." And that right there, have you ever seen that in real life? It's gorgeous. Like out towards the horizon, light streaming through the clouds onto the body of water. And when you see that image and it lifts you up, it's because that is a physical representation of the truth of God, or the idea that there's something higher, love first touching a mind and starting to open it. That's what we're seeing right there. And that's what it means here when God says, let there be light. And this Swedenborg describes it this way in Secrets of Heaven 20. You'll see we're just working our way through the beginning of Secrets of Heaven, because this is what he's doing in that book, is showing the meaning of this and how it applies to everybody. The first step is taken when we begin to realize that goodness and truth are something transcendent. As we advance further into the light, it dawns on us that the Lord exists and that he is goodness and truth itself. So the first light into that ego, dark kind of mind is, oh, there's something better. There's something more than this. Goodness and truth are something that is transcendent. There's a better life that we can have. And then as you get farther, you start to realize this better life is coming from a being, and that this being is the source of everything that I really actually want to have my life be around. So that's how we first move out of the formless void.